of a question. So I'm about to share my screen with you so that we can begin our studies together. Reading 5. This is Deuteronomy chapter number 10, verse 12. Moses, I know I say this every single day, multiple times a day, but you need to know the context for any of this to make sense. Moses is standing in front of the people and he's speaking to them shortly before his passing. He's encouraging them with words of love, words of critique, words of reproach, and words of inspiration. And now, O Israel, Moses says, what does the Lord your God demand of you? Only to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to worship the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. To keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command you this day for your good. So it starts off. Okay, I hope you're getting the energy of this of these verses, or this opening verse. He says, he makes it sound like, what's the big deal? What's God asking from you anyway? It's like a rhetorical question, like, what does God want? Not much. Only what? And then he lists a laundry list. To fear God, to walk in his ways, to love him, to worship him with all your heart and all your soul, to keep his commandments, etc. It sounds like a lot. So how does Moses minimize it? Rhetorically, by saying, kind of like, what's the big deal? It's only, and then he starts listing a very tall order. So how do we reconcile the way that Moses minimizes it at the top with the way he ultimately finishes off by giving a pretty heavy list? So, the Talmud asks the question. The Talmud says, Atu yira milsa zurtusihi, which is Aramaic for what is fearing God a small matter. He says, what does God ask of you? Only to fear the Lord, etc. Only. That word only makes it, it's a minimizing statement. It's only. Only? What do you mean only to fear God? And then to walk in his ways, and then to love him, and then to worship him, and then keep his commandments. What do you mean only? What kind of only is this? It's a tall order. So, the Talmud asks the question, what is fear? Something small? It's not easy to fear God, etc. Talmud answers, yes, it is a small deal. It's easy. For whom? For Moses. So who's doing the speaking? Moses. So what does Moses say? He says to the people, what's the big deal? God only wants you to fear him, etc. To Moses, that was easy. That's what the Talmud says. Is it easy? Yes. To Moses, it's easy. Comes along the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, the founder of Chabad, lived in the 1700s, and he asked the question in his book of Tanya. He asked the question, this doesn't make sense. The Talmud's discussion doesn't make sense. Because Moses was speaking to the people. So what are you telling me that for him it wasn't a big deal? But he's not speaking to himself, he's speaking to the people, and for the people it is a big deal. We know for you and I, for us, all of this stuff, this laundry list right here of things to do, our checklist of our commitments to God, that's a big deal. We live very busy lives, we live very distracted lives. There's other stuff vying for our attention, and other things that we're afraid of, maybe that we shouldn't be, and other things that we love that maybe we shouldn't. And it's hard. So you're telling me that for Moses it's easy. Thank you very much. But Moses wasn't speaking in the mirror, he's speaking to the people. Unless you say that Moses doesn't know his people. Unless you say that Moses thought that he was speaking to carbon copies of himself, that everybody was on his level. But you and I know by now, having studied Deuteronomy over the last 3 weeks, you and I know that Moses does not have any fantasies about where the people are holding. He knows exactly where they're holding. Moses knows exactly what they've done. He knows where they've been. He knows where they've failed. He knows where they've doubted. He knows where they've questioned. He knows it all about the people. He is under no fantasy, he's under no, fantasia, as I would say in Yiddish, under no fantasy that the people are on his spiritual level. He knows exactly where they are. So the question therefore returns, as the Alter Rebbe says, the question returns, what does it mean that Moses says to the Jewish people, no big deal, all God wants is you to fear him. And how does the Talmud answer? Yeah, well, for Moses, no big deal. How does that make sense for this conversation, which is Moses speaking literally to the Jewish people? He says, and now, O Israel, addresses them, that's the word I'm looking for, addressing them directly. And now, O Israel, he's speaking to them. What's the big deal? Just fear God. For you, it's no big deal. For them, it is. So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya answers the question. He says the secret to this, and by the way, this is what we're learning Thursday nights in our Think Different Tanya class. So if you're in that class and it sounds familiar, now you know why. So over the last few weeks, we've explored this idea that according to Kabbalah and Chassidut, Hasidic philosophy, every single person has a little bit of the spark of Moses, the spark of the soul of Moses inside them. A true leader like Moses is not just, circumstantially a leader, but it means that he has a neshama klolis, a general soul, if you will, a soul that impacts and imprints everyone else's soul, all of his people. Therefore, when Moses is speaking to the people, what he knows and what he believes is that they all have a little bit of the soul of Moses. If you want to look at it from a less esoteric perspective, we could say the following, that everyone has a soul that's a piece of God, that has all the potential in the world. The way we live our lives is not always in congruence with that 100%, but our potential is infinite. So Moses is speaking to the part of us that's the potential, not the actual necessarily. Does that make sense? Moses is speaking to who we could be, not necessarily to who we are. In general, when it comes to leadership, it's always good to see people as who they could be, because otherwise you're not really leading them anywhere. You're just kind of speaking, down to where they currently are by happenstance. Happens to be that's where they are, what they're doing, but that's not really seeing them. So Moses really sees them. He really sees their potential, their soul, the spark of Moses in them. In other words, if we say that Moses is somebody who actualizes his spiritual potential in a greater way than perhaps most, well, then the spark of Moses means that everyone has the power to actualize themselves spiritually more than what they're currently doing. And that's what Moses is seeing. And to that, Moses says, no big deal. Just fear the Lord, walk in his ways, love him, worship him with all your heart, all your soul, keep his commandments, etc. And it'll be for your good as well. Hope that made sense. So let me just tie a bow on it and wrap it up. What does it mean for you and I right now in our lives? Simple idea. And that is, we should not shortchange ourselves. Don't undersell yourself. You and I, we have incredible spiritual potential that is not yet tapped into. No matter where we are, there's always more. So let's strive for more than what we currently have. That's first message. Okay, let's continue. Moses continues quite poetically saying, behold, to the Lord your God belong the heavens and the heavens of the heavens, the earth and all that's in it. Only your forefathers the Lord desired to love them, and he chose their seed after them, you out of all peoples, as it is this day. Okay, so he speaks about how God is in control of everything. He speaks about the patriarchs again. A favorite topic of Deuteronomy is about God's covenant, God's love for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and for their descendants, the Jewish people. Okay, verse 16, very interesting verse. You shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart. Right? Very interesting turn of phrase over there. You shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart. What does that mean? So essentially, the way the commentators explain it is that our hearts should not be closed in and covered up and desensitized, if you will, to things that are spiritual, to God. It's very easy going through life to develop children are generally more spiritually sensitive. Children are more attuned to, to wonder, to higher things. when children ask their parents, where do we come from? Where do babies come from? Parents get all, oh no, how do we answer this question? What does the kid mean? The kid just means, the child has actually a spiritual question in mind, right? Where do we come from? The parent is thinking, oh no, biology, the talk. It's like a different guy. And then you tell it to a child, like, what are you talking, like, what? I mean, it's interesting information to know, I guess, but like, what are we talking about now? How do we get there to that topic? I just wondered, where does life come from? You're telling me the mechanics of it. Thank you very much. Now I need to process that. But a child, especially a young child, of course is going to wonder, where do we come from? But not from it's not a loaded question. Parents are like, oh no, it's a loaded question. Not a loaded question. Where do you come from? Where do babies come from? They come from God. They come from the Creator. Life comes from the Creator. By the way, not saying that you ignore the talk yes, but understand this: a child is wondering about the universe and has a spiritual question. Children are more spiritual. As we get older, why does it happen? You and I know why it happens, because life. But as we get older, as we age, I don't even mean like old. I mean, like 8 or 9 already years old. We already become a little bit more cynical, and we become a little bit more jaded. And the first time a child is told something that's not true, suddenly they're like, oh, there's something called a lie. I guess that's a thing. And that's another layer, that's a layer of trauma that the child has to deal with now. Never knowing what's true and what's not anymore, right? Being disappointed the first time. We develop, we encounter trauma. I'm using a heavy word, but I don't mean it in the full extent. We encounter disappointment and challenges and trauma a little bit, and hopefully not a lot. And because of that, we have to protect ourselves. So we build layers of protection. So we don't let people get too close. We don't take them too seriously. We take things with a grain of salt, right? We don't believe everything we hear. Yeah, am I right? Of course I'm right, right? We keep things a little bit arm's length. What happens is we put all these protections around us that we end up a little less sensitive. So what does Moses say here, verse 16? You shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart. Be more sensitive to God, truth, reality, spirituality. Your fellow. Be more sensitive. Somebody who, for example, was in a relationship and really gave their heart and then was hurt by the other person. Yeah? A very natural reaction of that is to be much more guarded about giving your heart to someone else, or again in that way. It's because become much naturally. It's a defense mechanism, a protection mechanism. Call it an evolutionary mechanism, whatever you want to call it. It's the same thing. You become more guarded. I was hurt. I thought. I was disappointed. I was hurt. That's it. So Moses asks us, begs us, beseeches us to be sensitive, especially when it comes to God. And be no more stiff-necked. Therefore, be no more stiff-necked. Don't be so stubborn and so... Although stubbornness has worked for us, right? We're still around because of that, because we're stubborn. I mean, saying the Jewish people are still around all these years later after all the attempts to knock us down. We're still here because of that. I mentioned that Tuesday night in the Jewish Course of Why class. But when it comes to God, we can be a little bit more sensitive. Now, a very interesting verse, 17. See, every verse is so, always, but especially in Deuteronomy, it's so interesting. You never know where it's going to twist and turn. Look at this one now. For the Lord your God is God of gods and the Lord of the lords. Okay, like the head honcho, the great mighty and awesome God. Look at this one. Who will show no favor, nor will he take a bribe. Interesting. So now Moses talks about this, about how God judges accurately, truthfully. God does not show favor. God does not take a bribe. In other words, if you're committed, God's committed. If you're in, then God's in with you. If you pull out, if you're, oh, I'm here but I'm also there, it's not. God is an accurate mirror. Shows no favor, doesn't take a bribe. What does that mean, doesn't take a bribe? How could God take a bribe? I don't know. But I'll tell you this. There's a story about a fellow who has a court case. He turns to his attorney and he says, before the case, they're preparing, he says, how about we slip the judge some money? He's like, not this judge. This judge, if you even attempt, if he gets even a whiff of a bribe, he'll get incensed. Okay, fine, good. Anyway, case happens, and this fellow actually wins the case. Goes over to his lawyer after the case. He says, "Thank you for the advice. I actually sent him a bribe. But thanks for the advice. It worked." He's like, "What? I told you not to." He's like, "No, I gave him a bribe, but I put the other guy's name on it." Anyway, so look, God doesn't take a bribe. You can't fool. What does it mean take a bribe? Take a bribe means that, suddenly you took a favor. Suddenly you can't think straight. Suddenly your thinking is aligned with the person that curried favor by you. Suddenly you're like, Talmud tells some fantastic stories about rabbis who were judges, who Rabbi said that, trying to remember the story, there's like a series of stories. There was one time that a rabbi was traveling, or he came to a brook, came to some water, and a fellow helped him across the water. And the fellow introduced himself as somebody who's having an upcoming court case. And the rabbi said, "Thank you for letting me know, because I will not be able to sit on your case as a judge." Why? Because you did a favor for me. So if I sit on your case, if I judge your case, I will start thinking of things. And in fact, the Talmud says a story about a rabbi, a judge, who a very slight favor or nice word was said to him by somebody involved in a case, and therefore he recused himself of the case, and he sat in to listen to the case, and he remarked afterwards how, as he's hearing the case, knowing his own possible bias, he still caught himself thinking of so many different justifications for that side over the other side. How subtle, but how powerful bribery is. By the way, you know who bribes us the most? Of every human being, you know who bribes us the most? Ourselves. We have the most personal bias of anyone. That's why it's really hard to look at ourselves objectively. Why? Because we take bribes from ourselves all the time. We want to be nice to ourselves. We like ourselves, right? We do favors for ourselves. We make ourselves good. We are the ultimate bribers of our own selves, and therefore we are the worst. We are the least capable of accurately judging our own selves to figure out, what really needs improvement, etc. Always good, therefore, to have a good friend who is not afraid to tell us what we need to work on. A mentor, a friend, a colleague, always good to have another party outside of ourselves for self-growth. Okay, but anyway, the point is that God is fair and accurate. He executes the judgment. This is fantastic. He executes the judgment of the orphan and the widow, and he loves the stranger to give him bread and clothing. Executes the judgment of the orphan and widow means that God takes care of the orphan and widow. And God loves the stranger. God cares about the segments of society that others, perhaps, might disregard. Think about it. Go into any city, and you see there are certain segments of the population that are neglected. What is the Torah saying? What is Moses saying about God? God cares about the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. And then then Moses says to us, "You also shall love the stranger." And then Moses makes it personal. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You know how it feels to be the outsider. You know how it feels to be the outcast. You know how it feels to be the one that doesn't fit in, and therefore you get picked on and enslaved. You know how it feels. Don't do that to someone else. You're going to be in Israel. You're going to be the ones. It's going to be your land. And then there's somebody new to your place. Do not subjugate them. Do not enslave them. Do not make them feel uncomfortable. It's immediately followed by this line. You shall fear the Lord. The commentaries point out that's often said in the Torah right after a mitzvah that only you know about. Only you know if you actually love the stranger or not. Only you know if you care about the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. Only you know that. You can always say, yeah, of course I care. You can always lie. No one can catch you. No one can judge from the outside how you feel inside about the other, about that's what I'm looking for. The ones that are outcast from society, right? Only you know how you feel about them. If you also disregard or if you care, if you love. That's why the Torah says you shall fear the Lord. Meaning, God knows. God knows what's inside. If you care about that, then you'll make sure to clean up your act inside. Because God knows about that. You shall fear the Lord your God, worship him and cleave to him and swear by his name. He is your praise and he is your God, who did these great and awesome things for you, which you've seen, which your eyes have seen, with 70 souls. Love it. This is a verse that we say at the Seder on Passover night. Part of the Haggadah. Open up your Maxwell House prayer Haggadah, or whatever, which your favorite one, and this verse is in there. With a dramatic verse. With 70 souls your forefathers descended to Egypt, and now, your God, the Lord your God has made you as the stars of the heaven in abundance. Many, many, many more than 70. By the way, it's still not billions, right? We're still, you know what's crazy? I always think of this as like just mind-boggling. There were 2 to 3 million Jews when they left Egypt. 3,300 years ago, there were 2-3 million. Talk about a flat line of growth, essentially over 3,000 years. That's not like 300 years. No, 3,000 years that you should only go from 3 million to 15 million. It's mind-boggling. I mean, you would think it would be billions by now, just exponential growth. Pretty much a flat line. I mean, over 3,000 years, that's essentially so gradual you wouldn't even notice. If you were walking that, you wouldn't even notice that it's uphill. What does it mean? I don't know. It means that there have been a lot of us that have been taken away from us. It means that a lot of us have opted out. It means that it's not easy to stay committed. It means that if we're here and we know we're Jewish, you have 3,000 years behind you of people who never let go. That's remarkable. That's remarkable. That's the most remarkable piece of this, by the way, to me. Whoever is still around means that for 3,000 years, in your family, there were heroes, warriors who never let go. That's remarkable. So, little Jewish guilt, don't let go. Don't be the one to drop the ball. All right, but that's the Jewish guilt part of it. Getting back to the immediate context. The other understanding of making you as the stars of heaven, in abundance makes it sound like it's a numbers game. Just like there are many stars, there are many Jews. But again, there aren't that many. I mean, so there's another way of understanding it. Not necessarily in quantity, but in quality. What's a star? What's a star? Too many clicks. What's a star? A star is a bright, shining body against the backdrop of night, of darkness. And that's what we're meant to be. I can cue up my film trailer voiceover voice. In a world of darkness. You and I are empowered and called upon to be a shining star. To not succumb to the darkness, to not give in, to not throw in the towel, to not just be like everyone else, but to stand up against what's wrong, to stand for what's right, to be a radical individual. To be a Jew is to be a radical. Let's end with this theme. To be a Jew is to be a radical. Abraham was a radical. Everyone believed in idols. Everyone was worshiping idols, this God, that God. Abraham was a radical. Isaac was a radical. Jacob was a radical. Jews have always been radical. Not afraid to challenge the conventions of the world for what they believe is right. So you and I should do the same thing. And when we do so, when we stand for goodness, even when everyone, I'm not saying that this is necessarily the case, but I'm saying even if everyone around us, how's everyone on board with this thing that's clearly not right? You be the one that stands up for what's right. And then you're the star. Not only in my books, but in God's books, but also in the sense of what a star is. A star is that which shines when it's dark outside. So when it's dark outside, don't forget to shine. That's the Jewish mission. Thank you for joining me today for the Daily Power Parsha. Hope you enjoyed it. We didn't even finish the fifth reading. Still goes for a little bit. But every verse so laden, filled with insight, intellectual ideas, emotional ideas, spiritual ideas. I hope you enjoyed it. Just to recap a few of them, we talked about the power of our souls and tapping into that power. The Moses inside of us. We spoke about circumcising the heart, even if it's difficult, to remain sensitive even after disappointment, even after the trauma of life, to remain sensitive to others and to God. We spoke about bribe taking and how we're susceptible to personal bias and how we have to have others in our lives to help us see ourselves a little bit more clearly. We spoke about loving the stranger and how that's something that even when others look down at certain people, you and I are charged by Torah not to fall into that same pattern. We know how that felt. We know how it was to be a stranger in a strange land. Don't pay that forward to others. And finally, we spoke about the notion of being a star. So, let's all be stars and do the other things that I mentioned. And let's make the world a brighter place. Thank you for joining me today for Daily Power Parsha. Don't forget, check out the new website constantly. You never know when something new is going to pop up. By the way, we have some new things that are going up today, hopefully. So continue to stay tuned and join us. I also want to make a special honorary mention. We spoke about the jewelry workshop before at the top, but I want to make another mention. In 2 weeks from tonight, we have an incredible historic evening with Dr. Edith Eger. I don't know why my brain just froze for a moment. Dr. Edith Eger, who is known as the ballerina of Auschwitz. She danced for Mengele, the angel of death, and she has an incredible story. Her life story you couldn't make it up. But in addition to her story, she also is a clinical psychologist. And she considers Auschwitz her classroom, where she learned a lot about human behavior and a lot about trauma and a lot about how to heal and help others heal from trauma. And so she'll be speaking about her story, but also this topic, especially in light of what we're all going through. We're all going through, on some level, a disruption of the norm and therefore some measure of trauma. And we're going to have a lot of powerful conversation with her in 2 weeks. So join us for a historic evening with Dr. Edith Eger. You can find out more information on the website. We also have it up on Eventbrite. Now we have 2 competing platforms. Don't worry, you can sign up on both. I'm kidding, choose one. But join us in 2 weeks on August 20th. All right. Donna, Matt, Sandrine, and Stephanie. It's great to see you all. Any questions? No? Okay. See you tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel. Tomorrow at noon. All right. Take care, everyone. Stay healthy. Tonight, Tanya at 8. All right. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Pleasure.